Literature is the art of written or spoken expression. Since the beginning, humanity has had the desire to tell stories, express emotions and feelings, remember events, and give free rein to their imagination in the creation of works of all kinds and purposes. In this small series of videos, we will see some curiosities of literature and its history, to better understand some concepts, understand the background of various stories, and learn the motives of their authors. We will do a chronological review through the history of literature. I hope you like the video and increase your curiosity and interest for reading. 1. What is an epic? An epic, or also called an epic poem, is a type of poem in which the adventures of a hero who can be historical or legendary are related. Another characteristic is that the epics are very long. For example, the Iliad, one of the most famous epics, is made up of 15,000 verses. The epics are also the oldest known literary texts, most likely stemming from an oral tradition. 2. Gilgamesh's poem. In ancient Mesopotamia, writing appeared at the beginning of the Bronze Age, through cuneiform signs that were used by the Sumerian and Akkadian languages. The Gilgamesh poem is the oldest story ever discovered, dating from 2100 BC. It is a collection of stories that narrate how the legendary king Gilgamesh is punished by the gods due to his arrogance and thus undertakes an adventure that will make him wiser and more self-aware. 3. The Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead is a compendium of spells written in ancient Egypt. A copy was buried next to the dead so that they would read it in the afterlife and use its information to find protection and guidance in the underworld. 4. The Homeric question. Homer is considered the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, yet very little is known about him. And since ancient times, historians have put forward all kinds of explanations about who he was, when he lived, if he really wrote both poems, and his existence has even been questioned, but a definitive answer has not yet been reached. All this is called the Homeric question. 5. Ilium. Ilium is the other name given to Troy, the legendary city that was razed to the ground by the Achaeans. For a long time, it was believed that it was just a myth, but excavations made in Anatolia, Turkey, show its existence, and it has been linked to the Hittite Empire. 6. The Odyssey. This epic, considered a sequel to the Iliad, narrates the return of Odysseus, one of the Achaean heroes, to his homeland after the Trojan War. However, making such a journey will be quite a feat, as Odysseus and his men will face the fury of the gods, whom they offended, and will have to fight monsters and traps. But finally, after 10 years, Odysseus will manage to reach Ithaca, his land, where his wife and son are waiting for him. 7. Theogony. It is an epic poem written by Hesiod, where the origin of the cosmos and the gods is recounted. The battles of the gods for power are also narrated, which end with the triumph of Zeus. 8. Sophocles. Sophocles was born in the year 496 BC. He was respected by Athenian society, held the position of treasurer in the government of Pericles, and was also a military commander. But what brought him the greatest recognition was his work as a playwright. He won first place in the Dionysia theater contest several times. He wrote 123 tragedies, but unfortunately only 7 of them have come down to us. The most famous is Oedipus Rex, a play that tells us the story of Oedipus, who is the center of a tragic prophecy, about a son who kills his father and ends up marrying his own mother. 9. Tragedy and comedy. They were the two types of drama produced in classical Greece. In tragedy, the narrative progresses until it reaches a catastrophic and unfortunate end. On the other hand, in comedy, generally satirical in tone, its conclusion is usually a happy ending. 10. The Aeneid. The Aeneid is the masterpiece of its author, Virgil. It is a story about the origins of Rome, which is believed to have been commissioned by Emperor Augustus. The work is an epic that narrates the journeys of Aeneas from Troy to Italy, and how this journey led to the founding of Rome. The inspiration it takes from the Iliad and the Odyssey also serves to give the Roman Empire a mythological and divine origin. 11. The Metamorphoses. The Metamorphoses is an epic by the Latin poet Ovid. it is a set of many stories that have in common the transformation, as a consequence of the passions. Ovid brings together legends from Greco-Roman antiquity in this work and has inspired many other artists. 12. Beowulf. Beowulf is the oldest Anglo-Saxon poem that is complete, being dated between the 8th and 11th centuries. It is written in Old English and narrates the exploits and feats of Beowulf, a warrior who appears to help the king of the Danes and his people of the fearsome monster Grendel and his mother. The poem was also a source of inspiration for J.R.R. Tolkien, author of Lord of the Rings. 13. Arabian Nights. The 1001 Nights is a large collection of ancient Indian, Persian and Arabic stories. The main frame is the story of Shahrazad, a princess who will tell a story to the king every night and leaves it incomplete to finish it the next night. A curious fact about the 1001 Nights is that some of his most famous stories such as Sinbad the Sailor or Aladdin were not part of the 1001 Nights, but were added in Europe when they were translated. 14. The Songs of Deed. The epic songs were epic poems, and are considered the beginning of French literature. They were part of the so-called Matter of France, which was a literature dedicated to the exploits of historical figures such as King Charlemagne. The epic songs were also taken to Spain, and inspired the creation of other poems such as the Song of Mio Cid, the first long poem in Spanish. 15. Chivalrous Romance. Over time interest shifted from epic songs to chivalrous romances, which were stories inspired by Arthurian legends, romantic stories of knights and maidens, and some dealing with the search for the Grail. This type of works was very well received, and they were well received until the arrival of the Renaissance. By this time, the stories of knights were already one more cliché. 16. The Troubadours. The troubadours were artists who traveled through the courts of Europe, to entertain kings and nobles with their songs in which they narrated stories. Their themes included mainly love stories, but they also sang about heroic deeds. 17. Alfonso X. He was king of Castile and other territories. He was born in Burgos in the year 1221. He was nicknamed the Wise Man for promoting knowledge and art. During his reign he commissioned various writings on different topics such as law, music, or astronomy. In this way he contributed to Castilian, being a predecessor of modern Spanish. 18. The Divine Comedy. Despite the fact that prose literature was beginning to gain popularity, poetry was still used to tell stories. This is how the Divine Comedy was elaborated, a very elaborate epic that its author, Dante Alighieri, took about 12 years to complete and narrates his passage through hell, purgatory and paradise. The work takes elements from classical Greek and Roman literature, contemporary European philosophy, and makes an interpretation of Thomistic philosophy. This monumental poem contains references and allusions of all kinds, religious, mythological and the politics of his time. Another noteworthy fact is that the comedy is written in Tuscan, the language that served as the basis for Italian, instead of Latin, considered the language of culture. 19. Classic. At this point it is worth clarifying what the classical term applied to a literary work refers to. A classic is a work that by general consensus is considered worthy of study. But in a historical sense, works from Greco-Roman antiquity are called classics. 20. The framed narrative. One or several stories within other stories is known as a framed narrative. It is a technique that has been used since ancient times. Some examples are the 1001 Nights, where the protagonist tells a story to the king every night, or also the Decameron, a work by Giovanni Boccaccio, in which each young person in a group of 10 tells a story every day for 10 days, to distract themselves from the confinement they are subjected to during the plague. 21. The Canterbury Tales. Another example of framed storytelling is the Canterbury Tales. It is a story of a group of 29 pilgrims who each decide to tell 4 stories during a trip, 2 on the way out and 2 on the way back, and the one who tells the best story will win a banquet paid for by the others. However, its author could not finish the work, as he barely wrote 24 stories, leaving the project unfinished. In any case, the Canterbury Tales are considered a masterpiece and one of the most important works of English literature. 22. The Quixote. Don Quixote is considered the masterpiece of the Spanish Golden Age, and for some it is even the greatest literary work ever written. It is considered the origin of the modern novel due to its realism and investigation into the emotions and motives of its characters. The play is about the life of Alonso Quijano, an old man who, inspired by the stories of chivalrous romances, names himself a knight and sets off in search of adventure and heroism. But unlike the adventure stories of knights, of great battles, treasures and maidens, Don Quixote's adventures are simpler and more mundane, and in his illusion, he mistakes windmills for giants. 23. The interpretations of Don Quixote. Since its publication, Don Quixote has received various interpretations through the ages. It was considered a parody of chivalrous romances, as well as a satire of Spanish expansionism symbolized in the heroic delusions of Don Quixote, and later the work was seen as a tragedy, a sad story about the longings of a man. 24. Lope de Vega. Lope de Vega was one of the greatest playwrights of the Spanish Golden Age, producing some 1,800 titles, without a doubt one of the most prolific authors in history. 25. Shakespeare. Shakespeare's plays are considered the origin of today's theater. To this day they continue to be reproduced and have inspired countless artists. The first folio was a compendium containing several of his major works, and is the first compilation of the author's work. It was published in 1623, and some of the few copies that have come down to our days have been auctioned for more than 4 million euros. This has been the first part of the 50 curiosities about literature. I hope you liked the video and don't forget to watch the second part, where we will take a look at Gothic literature. We will know works that have innovated with their style, and we will also talk a little about the Latin American boom.